And we are trying to speak about creating consumer internet and cellular and apps consumer startups out of Israel, which until just a few years ago was some sort of a strange concept, but I think that we are already beyond the big questions of whether we can produce those companies or are we at all conditioned to produce these kind of companies out of Israel. And today we are discussing a number of exciting live examples of companies that either have made it happen already or in the process of making it happen big times. So without further ado, Talmon, you have created a significant consumer-oriented platform. And can I ask you please just to give us some indication as to numbers to the extent you can share with us? Just tell us what's going on and where are the numbers today.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. The last time we announced numbers, I believe, was about a month ago, so assume some growth since. We have over 100 million activated users. Most of these users are actually active. What else can I tell you?
100 million active users.
Activated.
Activated users. Where is the applause? 100. And this took you 10, 20 years. How long did it take you to get to that number?
Well, it's going to be 40 in December, but took us about a year and a half.
All right. 18 months, 100 million activated users. That sounds to me like a consumer company. Let's leave it at that. And please help me welcome Yael from Waze. Can you share any numbers that will indicate growth or successful penetration into markets? Where is Waze standing today?
Sure. We're close to 30 million users today. We're growing at about 100,000 new users a day. So it's about the range of about 3 million users a month. And it's pretty much in the exponential growth right now.
Territories of penetration?
Main country is the US. And after that, Italy, France, Israel, and pretty much everywhere else. Latin America, Malaysia, Brazil.
Great. Are you allowed to mention revenue?
Very initial revenues right now. We've been playing with the models mostly in Israel, beginning in a few months in the US as well, launching in the US as well.
So we'll get back to revenue in just a few minutes. Thank you, Yael, for that. And by the way, Waze does deserve a huge credit from the crowd, please. And next, here, Bob Rosenchein, one of the top secrets of the Israeli internet consumer oriented companies. Until a number of years ago, I think not too many people here in Israel knew to appreciate the huge accomplishment of Answers.com. Answers was acquired by a private equity firm about a year and a half ago.
Yes.
So, Bob, to the extent you can you please share with us either the numbers at the day of acquisition or just some parameters that will help us understand the accomplishments of Answers.com as a consumer-facing internet company?
As we grew with Answers.com, it became a top 20 U.S. website. In fact, it's the only website in the top 20 in America that was an Israeli company. That means we had more unique users a month than ESPN or HP, Adobe, some very well-known sites. We had about 54 million unique monthly users, the way Comscore measured it in the U.S., and 95 million monthly users worldwide. And we had a lot of fun with Answers.com. It still exists. We exited in 2011, but I'm very proud to have founded and led it and taken it to that stage.
And Answers.com was also a public company, so you could also share revenue numbers, I think.
Yes.
What was the revenue rate at the point of selling the company?
For the last reported year before we were bought, we had $22 million in revenue, about $7.5 million in profit. And I can tell you that being a public company on NASDAQ has its own fun challenges. I guess I had no white hair before we went public, but that wouldn't be true.
So we'll get back to that. Let me just pause here for a second. We have many entrepreneurs here in the audience. How many of you entrepreneurs or investors in entrepreneurial companies, how many of you have a significant part of your business defined on the acquisition of millions of users, and let's call that consumer-oriented companies. How many of you will need more than 5 million users by the end of the day to define a successful implementation of your business plan? Please raise your hand. All right, so the good news is we have many of them in the audience, and that means that a lot of Israeli companies, entrepreneurs, and investors believe that we can make this happen. This is a huge challenge, and we are seeking your advice here. Lady and gentlemen, what is the main tip or set of tips that you could give to a variety of companies here as to how do you go about creating a huge community around your business? Yael, we start with you.
Good thing that I'm first because we're probably going to say the same thing. I think the one thing is definitely the product. So in the consumer digital apps, services space, I think that it's the one place where you really can't hide behind anything. Nothing will help you. God will not help you if you don't have a good product. So the only way to reach consumer mass market is good product.
All right. I know of many companies that have good products but have a very low number of users. So I guess there is some secret sauce there that comes on top of the excellent product.
Well, you have to have a good product, but it doesn't mean that the idea behind it is good and everything. Everything has to be good. But at the end of the day, if the product doesn't work out, if the idea is not good enough, if you're not appealing directly to the consumer, then they're the ones who vote, and they're the ones who do the distribution for you, and they're the ones that pretty much do everything for you. You're dead.
Okay, so Talmon, in order not to repeat, please help us understand how do you get to the first. What was the main milestone? The first million? The first 5 million? What is that you consider to have been the main accomplishment that indicated to you that you indeed can make it happen to those huge numbers?
Actually, first of all, to add on what Yael said, and this is actually something that's pretty obvious with Waze as well. You need a product that provides sustained benefit to the user. I mean, you can have a really good product, use it once, you just don't need it anymore, so you're going to just, let it dwindle or uninstall it. Then you're probably not going to have enough time to share it with your friends. So it's not going to go viral. Social engineering is obviously, an added bonus as well. As far as we're concerned, we actually launched the product initially in the first, I think, 3 or 4 weeks in Israel as a test case. So we made it available on the App Store. We launched on iPhone at first. And we wanted to see how it's going to behave in Israel. So we told about the app to about, 10, 15 of our friends. And we monitored to see the progress of the application. So the next day we saw, maybe 50 new users, and it was 20 and 25. And it kept on growing. After about 2 weeks or so, we're at 100 a day. And
all in Israel?
Only in Israel.
Okay.
100 new users a day. And then the next day we got to 1,000. And the next day it got to 3,000. It sort of got to an inflection point. And then we got to 5,000 a day. But I think when we went to 100 to 1,000, we're like, whoa, we got something. So it really wasn't the first million for us or the first 100,000 or whatever. When we saw that, we figured when we launched it globally, which happened a few days later, then over the course of several weeks, we're going to see the same globally. What happened is that it took about a day. I honestly don't know why. But if you look at it on a country-by-country basis, it behaved exactly the same way, just the timelines were compressed.
So let me stop you there. I'm going to try to get back to you and to try to press you on what actually has to be done in order to make this happen. But I think the good news for all of us entrepreneurs and investors here, going from 100 users to 1,000 users is big news. This is what we are hearing from a person who is running a 100 million activated users company today. 100 to 1,000 is very important. So those of you, by the way, who go to investors and they tell you, well, you have 1,000 users, I don't really care, tell them what we have just heard over here. It is important. Mark, representing the dark side, I guess. How do you go about Israeli-originated companies that are trying to go after the global consumer market? Okay. switching gears here to the other side, I just heard you representing an investment perspective. Why not you tell us about your company and your perspective on consumer?
Sure. I think it's interesting. Just we talk about the Israeli internet consumer market, and I think just looking at this panel, I think it's alive, kicking, and very healthy, but it's also very diverse. If you look at the 4 different companies represented here, each one of them has been very successful in different ways with different types of consumer offerings and product offerings. Perion, as example, formerly Incredimail, is probably one of the early comers to the consumer internet in Israel. We've been around since 2000. Our flagship product is Incredimail, desktop email application that's been around since, for some people, the dawn of time.
Can you give us some numbers? Because people were kind enough to share the numbers with us. Maybe you could do as well.
I wouldn't want to sit up here without some numbers, right? So we're a publicly traded company, and I share Bob's sentiment about being a publicly traded small cap company. It certainly offers a lot of challenges. We have about 10 million active users, and this is on our freemium part of our business. So we have an email application and a photo application. And when I refer to 10 million, it's people using that. We also have lighter applications where there is no premium upsell. And there we haven't published the numbers recently, but there's more than several million on that side of the business. We have a mixed business model of premium and advertising revenue. We're publicly traded, so for this year, we've given guidance to the market that our revenue will be between $52 and $55 million. We have really stepped down on the accelerator on growth over the last 3 years. 2010, just as a base mark for people in the audience, we were about a $27 million company, a little bit over. So we've really accelerated growth because part of our fundamental belief, and I think this is something that every consumer internet entrepreneur should think about, is there's real tremendous advantage to scale when you're addressing the consumer and marketing.
So Mark, going back to the question about investors, and this is even more acute as you being a public company, when you talk to analysts, when you talk to the street, what do people see in you representing an Israeli company? Do they see the challenges of going globally and creating a consumer community around the company, or do they just look at the numbers? And is that more important, the numbers and the revenue, than the community and the consumer facing?
It's interesting. Thanks. It's interesting. Well, this is also a lesson for consumer internet companies. You have to learn, innovate, and always change. So if the microphone doesn't work, quickly switch it out. Because if you want to satisfy the consumer's needs, you've got to react very quickly. And I think all of us can say that that's part of the success of our products, is being able to respond quickly to what you see customers are doing or responding to. So if I'm talking and nobody's listening, then I should change the topic or change the microphone. As an example. Regarding analyst questions, it's changing a bit. Historically, we are publicly traded on NASDAQ and the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. The questions coming out of Israel, historically, and this has changed a lot in the last year, I would say, it was very hard for the Israeli investment community, bless you, to understand consumer internet, and a company that's an application-oriented company, that the story isn't about the technology behind the scenes. Even though we have technology, and anybody who has ever built an email application knows it's not a simple endeavor, but the Israeli analyst community, not the VCs, the public market analysts, had trouble getting their hand around consumer internet. It's changed a lot given the success of a bunch of the consumer internet companies. In the US, they're obviously much more comfortable with the model. They certainly look at, there's 2 types of companies, I would say, at this stage in the internet on the public markets. There are ones that have tremendous growth, and then a lot of the investor communities are certainly looking at that growth, and that's a little bit what blinds them. And then they're looking now more and more to fundamental numbers post Facebook and Zynga going out public. But there's more still, the focus is on promise. And then there's companies like us who have been very cash flow positive for years, and then a lot of the discussion gets into the cash flow, the sustainability of the business. How does it work with the consumer? Understanding our mix, which is a bit unique, of subscription revenue and advertising revenue.
So those sound like the measures of any business that the street would care about. Do you feel that you are paying any kind of penalty because of being an Israeli or Israeli-related company, as valued by the market, as questioned by the analysts, and so on?
I mean, I think our biggest challenge in the public market is we're a small cap, and it's hard to get on people's radar. You know, the capital markets in the U.S. Are typically, you know, driven by institutional investors, and we have a market cap of $70 million, and it's hard to get onto the guys, the portfolio manager's radar screen. Certainly, it's even more difficult being a company that sits in Israel, but I think our challenges are no different than a U.S.-based, small cap company of $70 million.
Cool. So, Talmon, going back to you, 100 million users, how do you define success over the next 5 years? What is that you will have seen happening with your company that you will have considered success?
First of all, internally, we still refer to this as a project. We're not even calling it a company. And I think something is a project.
Let's talk about the project for a sec. How many people do you have? Funding from? Just give us the parameters so that we understand what are we talking about.
We're somewhat over 100 people.
Okay.
I'd say about 35% of them in Israel. The rest actually out. This is not an Israeli company. We just do development here. Some of our development is done here.
Funding? Outside funding?
Friends and family.
To the tune of what? $50 million, $10 million, $1 million. Just give us some ballpark.
Yes.
Okay. Good answer. Sounds like a credible project to me. What is that you will have considered success in 5 years?
First of all, I think it becomes a real business once it becomes a business, once you start generating revenues and profits. Until then, it's a project. I have to say we're not running it with distinct goals of, we want to make X millions, X billions, whatever, a year in 3-5 years. The objective is to grow the business, get more people, and build something really big.
If you have to choose between two, revenue or getting to 500 million users, what is more important for you right now?
Well, I'd say the question is how much revenue?
I agree. So let's define substantial revenue as a goal where you will have to compromise some resources, you'll have to work hard on creating revenue channels, distribution and whatnot. I don't know what the business model is, but assume that you would have to compromise some of the user growth in order to generate revenue. What is more important to you?
The way we look at it, we are building a freemium business. So the core services of Viber will stay free, and certain things are going to cost you money. Nothing that's free today will cost you in the future. Now, the typical conversion rate from free to pay will be, 1, 2, 5. If you're Spotify, it's 25%, but I personally think it's not sustainable. Skype, I think, is about 6%. So no matter what premium feature we add, it's a feature that we're adding for somewhere between 1 to 5, 6% of our users. Now, let's look at the average feature. Are we going to add a feature which serves 1 to 5% of the users? If it's a very simple feature to add, for example, we let users download their messages. How many people use it? Small. How long did it take us to develop? A couple of days. So it's in. But a massive feature which will serve only 1 to 5% of the users is not going to get highly prioritized because it's going to be at the expense of something else. So this is why monetization is taking a back seat to user growth. But at the same time, you need to turn this into a business. So it's there, but it's subordinated to the growth of users and, more important, usage.
So because you politely refused to define success, I'll ask this from another angle. Facebook about 6 or 7 years ago had about 50 million users. You have today about 100 million activated users. Do you see yourselves acquiring 1 billion users in the lifetime of about 5 years from now?
Can I take a rain check on this question and answer in 5 years?
All right, we'll meet you. TWS is organizing this annually, so happy to meet you again. Yael, I think that the question is also relevant to you at Waze because you always have the trade-off, I think, between penetrating new territories or beginning to generate revenue and stepping up the gas efforts on just generating revenue from where you are at? What is the trade-off and where do you stand on that?
At this point, it's basically a combination of the two. I think that we've reached, actually, it's probably something that you need to do from the very early on. I mean, monetization is obviously, we're a business. At the end of the day, everybody's a business, so you have to always have that in mind. And I think that definitely when you reach that point in which we are at, you need to step it up significantly. It also depends on the amount of rounds that you've had and so on, your monetization status. But success is just a moving target constantly. I mean, if you would have asked me a long time ago, 30 million might have been a lot. But at this point, it's just we're here. There are all these metrics that we look at, and we're always looking at the next thing. So it's a combination of the two. We want to ramp up on all the metrics, numbers of users, usage, increase how central of an application we are in people's daily experience. And at the same time, we want to monetize, obviously. So those two things go together.
And obviously, you are still a private venture-backed company. You have venture investors, so nobody is listening to us right now. Do you feel the pressure building up towards an exit, towards profitability, towards significant other KPIs? How is the VC and the investors community looking at you? And that's what I think already $50 or $60 million into this company?
Yeah. Well, obviously, the two sides of things, the investors want to obviously always, look at making their exit as big as possible. We internally in the company, as management, I'm assuming, except the CEO, we just, keep running and running as fast as we can. We don't take these into consideration, like on our day-to-day aspect. So for us, again, we're focused on growing all the metrics and making everything possible for monetization. We're not in any way looking at having an exit in the near future.
This was a tip to the entrepreneur CEO in the crowd, by the way. You CEOs deal with the investors' headache and all the hustle and the overhead. Let your people work and create a good buffer. I think this is what I heard from you. Bob, tell us a little bit about the conclusions, or why did you decide to eventually sell Answers.com and not to continue to grow it organically, independently, as you were already there, growing the numbers and the company and its KPIs?
Well, Answers.com was growing nicely, and we saw the year-over-year growth. But you have to understand one important dynamic of public markets. Someone told me when we went public, you will not decide when you are bought. I thought that was very interesting, because our stocks went up and down, and as we reached profitability and became a top 20 website, it got very interesting. But at a certain level, as a public market, if a serious investor makes a serious offer, you need to consider it. So the only question that was in our minds was, is this a serious enough premium to justify it? I didn't have the choice. Well, I feel like it. I don't feel like it. At a certain level, it becomes a public question. You could be in trouble even legally if you turn down an offer which is rich enough, or vice versa, if you take an offer which is not rich enough. So those kinds of things weighed heavily on the board of directors, and we made a decision. So it's actually an easy answer. But as a private company, you have much more flexibility to grow the product, to grow revenues or not grow revenues. I want to just mention an interesting lesson, two lessons I learned from Yossi Vardi, who is an investor, an early investor in Answers.com. He said, first of all, the user experience, and I've heard this also from on this panel, the user experience is not the most important thing. The user experience is not the most important thing, it's the only thing. And if you internalize that, it's something that large companies like Apple have done very well with their consumer products, but also Viber, Waze are very focused on that. The other thing is the difference between good buzz, word of mouth, and viral. And the way Yossi defined it, which I think is true, you could have a great word of mouth. People like it, people talk about it, people write about it. That's not necessarily success, but it's useful. Viral, take a product like Waze or Viber, is a product which becomes more useful if your friends have it. Because they're building on user-generated content or user-generated interactions, all of a sudden, that's what makes your company successful. And that ability to focus your creative efforts into a consumer product, which is more useful if your friends use it, is the secret.
Wow. By the way, another tip to the audience, Yossi Vardi has good advices. Go after him. So I'd like to actually turn this to some audience-facing tips and advice that you panelists may give. You know, we have here many people who are just starting with their companies. I'm assuming that all of them have the aspirations to become a Waze, a Viber, a Credimail, and so on. First question is, how do you fund this thing? There is so much noise. There is a situation of scarce resources in terms of funding. What do you recommend to people? How do you get over the first funding phase that maybe many people, by the way, mistakenly, but many people consider as the most significant challenge, funding your little company to get it going? What do you recommend? Who should people go after? Type of investors, VCs or not VCs, private investors? How do you get this thing running? Any kind of tips from people who have made this, at least in terms of funding their companies privately, publicly, and so on? Mark, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, no, I think it's an important question that entrepreneurs need to think about. And prior to being at Perion, I spent 12 years in the venture capital sector here in Israel. And I think one of the challenges, and I understand where it comes from for entrepreneurs and early stage companies, is they very often, take a shotgun approach to funding, right? Because you want to close that round so you can work on your product and execute your business plan. But what often happens, and it's a challenge, particularly as you look at the consumer internet business model, which is a different business model and potentially a quicker growth, more capital efficient model than the typical IT venture investors is interested in Israel, is there sometimes is a mismatch. Just as an entrepreneur, I would emphasize, go and figure out what's the right business model that you want and then get the funding to match it. So you get a great meeting with a top tier VC that wants to write a check for $5 million. It's incredibly exciting and incredibly complementary to your idea, but decide beforehand if really that's the business plan on the funding side that you want to pursue. Because very often I see the funding at seed funding dictating the business plan of the company. And I think as the entrepreneur, it's one of the few times that you have to say, wait a minute, let me take a step back. And, obviously there's a lot of doors that you want to keep open, but I may be better off taking the $500,000 from a smaller fund or an angel and getting to the next step before I commit myself to the $5 million round. The more money you raise at the end of the day, the less choices you have about how you build your business, the more you have to be committed to a certain trajectory. And I think entrepreneurs often miss that because there is a need to run out, and I understand it, to get funding, but taking that extra step, I think, can be very, very valuable and align expectations with whoever your funding source is.
Let me ask quickly the four of you, because you are going to hear from many people here in the audience that investors do not fund early stage companies. They rarely do it. It's very hard to get a meeting with a VC. They will not return your call. All the stories of the dark side of the equation. And on the other end, private investors are quick to make decisions. They have their own scrutiny and they are free to do whatever they want. And the question is, really, frankly, does it really matter who my investor is? Or is it more important to just have a business plan and a team of people to make it happen? I'll appreciate sincere and direct answers.
First of all, let me give you some advice how not to raise money. Do not go to a VC and say, I have a safe job, I have a great idea, but I'm not willing to risk anything. They don't want to hear someone who is not willing to take risks. You need to take risks. Raise less money at the beginning, in my opinion. Fund it, family, friends, get a little bit of traction before you go to a more serious investor. That will speak to them. Second advice, believe in yourself. Be optimistic. You're a salesperson. And anybody who thinks that they're not a salesperson, everybody's a salesperson. Politicians, movie actors are all salespeople. You need to go into that investor meeting at the right time with the right plan, of course, but the plan itself is not enough. You have to show your personal commitment to the idea.
Bob, does it matter if I raise money from VCs or from private investors, angels who do or do not understand my business? Does it make a difference?
it depends on the stage. At the very, very beginning, before you have any traction, just an idea, and I remind you, and you know this best of all, it sometimes doesn't take as much money as you think to get an idea off the ground. There are ways to set up data centers on the fly, outsourced. So I'm saying don't overspend, don't get fancy furniture, don't get fancy offices, don't take an office in the Azrieli Center. Get off the ground a little bit of traction. At the right stage, a venture capital investor can add tremendous value. Connections, idea, guidance.
Thank you. Talmon, you mentioned that you raised some kind of funding from private investors. I am assuming that after people began hearing about your growth, everybody and their sister were chasing you. I mean, VCs, institutional investors, and so on. And without going there, my question to you is, as to others, does it really matter? Do you really care who your investors are? Do you have preference between VCs and private investors?
First of all, it definitely matters who you raise money from. If you're going to raise money from a VC, that it doesn't matter that much, okay, if everything is going great, you know? When you're making money, you're growing, everybody's happy. It starts to matter more when things are going south. And then the question is, who's the VC that is going to stick around, that's going to support you? Are you going to start seeing investors fighting with each other? If you're going to raise capital from a VC, I would look out, I would find out which of their previous investments actually failed. Go talk to the guys they invested in and see what happened, how did they behave when the things went south. And
so you're basically saying it's all about the people.
It's always about the people, not just when it comes to VCs.
Okay, Yael, representing a VC-backed company, does it make a difference?
It obviously always makes a difference, but it's like, you know, being married, you need to have, and then you just pick the best one that you can, right? It's not that you really have a choice. So you go to VCs and then you just pick up the best one. But I just wanted to say in terms of when to go and raise money, most of today's startups, most of the ideas that we've seen here don't really need funding in the very beginning. And this is kind of a misconception that you have an idea, you go raise money. So people think idea, money, execution. And it's actually kind of relatively, the energy that you spend in raising money is probably not much bigger than the energy that you would spend on actually building your business if you're a team of 2-3 talented people and you should have an engineering, you know, core within this team. So I think that the biggest mistake that I'm seeing is that people spend way too much money on VCs, on finding VCs, and then also people spend way too much money, time early on trying to do business development deals that are really not relevant for consumer brands and startups. Those are kind of the two Israeli typical mistakes in the early stage.
Great, so because we are almost done here, and this is a conference mainly focused on entrepreneurs, its organizers are entrepreneurs themselves, I would ask each of you to give your most important critical tip to the entrepreneurs in the audience. What is the one thing that you may want to suggest as a significant tip to the people here who are going to be on the stage 5 years from now with 100 million users under the belt? Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to, there's a tough balancing act as an entrepreneur. And I've seen this a lot, and we go through this as a business also. On one hand, you want to be committed, which is an important thing for the investor community, to your succeeding with your venture, but you also have to be flexible. And I struggle with this, and I think every entrepreneur struggles with this, and every person running a business. Like, at what point do you say, I've made this bet, and now, you know what, it's not working out, but I keep pushing ahead? And what point do you say, you know what, I've gone far enough, now I've got to adjust my strategy and move on. And I think that balancing act is critical to succeeding in a business. And there's no right answer, but I think as an entrepreneur, you know, at least being cognizant of that question, that can strangle a business or lead to success. You hear thousands of stories of the entrepreneur that, you know, is running out of money in the bank account and says, you know what, I still believe in this thing and I'm going to do it. And then, you know, with the last cent in his bank account, the thing pops and succeeds. You don't hear the tens of millions of stories of the people that shut down the business in that case. And I'm not saying I have the answer, but I think being aware of there's some really points where you get pushed to the wall, and be as intellectually honest as you can with yourself and figure out, okay, am I doing this for the right reason, or do I have to rethink it and try something else? I think is the key to really succeeding with any business, but certainly with a boot business where you don't have revenue, you're trying to get to customers and build out something that will succeed.
Sensitive persistence, I would summarize your words. Okay, Bob?
I agree with the persistence part. I would say be optimistic. Being optimistic does not mean being unrealistic. In other words, you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, what's not working about the story? Be prepared for failure. But you have to wake up in the morning, and in English we say, roll with the punches. How would I say it in Hebrew? Al tikanil chatzim, lekishlonot rabim. It happens. It happens. There will be ups and downs, but you need to stick with it. There's a wonderful line in The Matrix, for those of you who saw the movie The Matrix, where Morpheus is trying to teach Neo how to fight Kung Fu. And he gets up, he says, hit me. And then he says, don't think you can hit me, know you can hit me. And that's the point. Don't think you can succeed, know you can succeed. It doesn't mean that you will succeed. It means you have to go in there with the self-confidence, the optimism, the energy, and the perseverance.
Thank you, Bob. Yael?
I think that you should be just extremely focused, should always act as though you have one bullet to shoot, basically. So if you decide to develop something, it needs to be something that doesn't make an incremental change, but a fundamental change. And whenever you do something, you have to make sure, even if you have the ability to do many things, don't do many things. Just a few that make a fundamental and not an incremental change.
Talmon?
This will be more relevant to products the kind that we're building. If you're going to build a product that you think users are going to like, before going out there and actually building it, two pieces of advice. One, they say that half an hour on the internet will save you half a year and $500,000. So, see if other people are already doing it, and if they are, try to figure out if you can really outdo them. Putting that aside, and let's assume you've actually passed that barrier, tell your friends what you're doing. You don't need to be super hush-hush. You're not building a nuclear program. Actually, these are not hush-hush as well. And see how they respond. Now, you can get several responses. You can get something like, this is the most stupid thing I ever heard. They probably won't tell you that because they're your friends. They can tell you something like, I don't think this is that interesting. They can tell you something like, this is a nice idea, but I don't think this is relevant for me. And they can tell you something like, when can I have it? Everything except when can I have it is a no. It's just, nicer way of saying it. If not enough people tell you yes, then you're probably not going to get the users. And again, this is only for consumer products where you drive traffic because people actually go to you as a destination. Less relevant for, maybe a website like answers.com that gets a lot of SEO traffic.
Great. So just before thanking our panelists, I would like to leave you with one thought. These four people on my right side here have been touching, I made a quick calculation, about 250 million people around the world with their services, vision, product, and excellent performance. We have dozens of entrepreneurs here in the audience. That means to me that we can all together touch billions of users around the world. Go build your companies, make them a very successful story. Come to tell us about that story in years to come here at TWS. Thank you, Talmon, Yael, Bob, and Mark. Thank you very much.